thank you to UVM and to Gunn for having me not just speak here today, but for having me on such an esteemed board of advisors. It's a real privilege to be involved with UVM. And thank you to all of you for taking your time here in person and virtually on Zoom to listen to me today. As was said, my name is Allie. And I have been both privileged and challenged for the last 15 years of my career to sit on the edge of the inside of very big, complex systems. These are systems that are powerful and capitalist. And my job is to disrupt them, to work hard to change them, to innovate within them, and to make the people inside of them just a little bit uncomfortable at all times. So today I'm going to talk at you for a little while, though I much prefer to talk with you. So we're going to get through the at part and get to the with quickly, hopefully a little bit less than 30 minutes. But I'm excited for the conversation and really eager to hear your questions and observations. So I often joke that I know a lot about a lot, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know everything about anything, okay? A lot of you in academic institutions go really, really deep, and you do know everything about something, right? You're incredibly specialized in what you do. I sit in a very niche space of ESG, responsible investment, venture philanthropy, but within that space, I have to be a generalist and I have to kind of know broad issues and be able to talk about a lot of different things. And so there are a wide range of things that I could talk to you about today and that we can talk about later, but I'm going to focus my remarks on this idea of disrupting business and building a new economy for a sustainable future. Now, I'm talking about this topic today, and I know that it is not small, and I know that it is not straightforward, but I'm talking about it because however you want to say it, and it's been said a lot of different ways, right? Time's up, or we're living on a knife's edge, or this is the decisive decade. We're hearing these statements be made. The reality is that we can no longer sit by and kind of wait. We have to start to make really urgent, really meaningful changes if we want to have a chance at a planet that supports life, including our own. Now, I also recognize that building a new economy for a sustainable future is implying that I maybe have some answers. I don't. So sadly, I'm not going to be able to give you a silver bullet to walk out of here and be like, this is the thing, right? Ali said, here we go. We're going to do this one thing and we're going to fix it all. What I do know, though, is that we are living in an unbelievable moment of transition. And I'll talk about this in a moment, but I see myself as being a bridge builder between a moment in time where business was insatiable and extractive and rapacious in its nature in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, to a moment right now where we're talking about ESG and responsible investment, and we're thinking about community impact and SDGs, and this is also embedded in business, but we haven't yet reached any kind of destination, right? ESG is not a destination, it's a bridge. And hopefully it's a bridge to a future where we are living in a world where business is regenerative and it's inclusive and strategically aligned to the world that we want and we need. And so, while I'm not going to give you answers today, my hope is that I do give you a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of outrage, a little bit of perspective, a little bit of motivation to keep you going, because we need all of you brilliant, committed folks to keep going on these things. So here's the game plan. Let's see. Oh, this webinar is being recorded, so I don't have the mouse there. That's okay, Ben, no problem. Also, while I have you, this is not my normal voice. As my esteemed colleagues on the board said, I'm a bit husky right now. I'm getting
Only one said that.
Only one said that. There we go. I am getting over a case of laryngitis that I had a week ago Tuesday, but it's still sticking with me. So I apologize for the voice. Okay, so here we go. Here's the game plan. And also my font didn't convert, so it looks a lot more boring than it did. Bear with me. So first, where are we? Second, who am I? Third, why companies? And fourth, where do we go from here? So first, start framing the problem, which I've already done a little bit, but I think it merits a moment of doing that. So you guys are all here at the Gund. You know better than most audiences that I talk to kind of where we are in this moment in time. But I will summarize that by saying things don't look great, right? So we are losing 1,000 species a year. We are expected to have more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. We are experiencing once in a lifetime weather events once a year, right? So fires and floods and storms and surges. We have unprecedented income inequality, a long overdue racial reckoning. There are wars and famines, pandemics. Like the world is indeed on a bit of a knife's edge, as I mentioned. And I also think there is immense reason and opportunity for hope and optimism. And I think it's important when we have these conversations that we talk about both. And that can include the amazing scientific progress and technological innovation that's happening, things that we would have thought a few years or certainly decades ago would never be possible are now at our fingertips. I think recent policy shifts like the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the investment in climate mitigation, adaptation, policy and innovation has been massive. I think global cooperation has already in the last 7 years helped us to avoid the worst case scenario, which was a 4-degree temperature rise by the end of the century. We're already at 3 and we're heading closer and closer to 2. So I think that there's lots of reasons to be hopeful and optimistic. I think the other reason to be hopeful and optimistic is because of youth and young people and the activism that is happening and the shifts that are occurring generationally. Seems like every 10 years, as you go down from octogenarians to teenagers, you get more aggressive, more engaged, and more eager folks thinking about this problem and what they're willing to do to solve it. So with that said, a little bit of speaking of activists, a little bit about who I am. So first, who I'm not. So I'm, despite my lovely introduction, I am not an investor. I'm not a regulator. I have never founded a company turned unicorn. I don't even have an MBA, which is like, I know in my communities of business people, that does incite a little shock and awe, not maybe in academic world, but who I am is a bit of a pioneer, a bit of an edge skater and an agitator. And I think of myself as an activist, but I am an activist in capitalist clothes. Now, my parents, I was born the daughter of activists in activist clothes. That's my mom and that's my dad, Ann and Bill, sitting in a courtroom. Both of my parents have been in prison multiple times for their activism. My mom was pregnant in prison with me. So a strong disdain for authority and outsized beliefs are quite literally in my blood. I had parents that were put in prison for breaking into buildings and climbing onto submarines and spilling blood on weapons and nuclear warheads. And that was all in order to upend the military-industrial complex and capitalism at large. So my parents spent their life fighting the man, and I have spent my life working for him. And so the question is how, and my parents have asked that many times. So the first half of my life was spent in courtrooms and meeting houses, protests, soup kitchen lines, as my parents were part of the Plowshares movement and doing work around nuclear nonproliferation, anti-poverty, thinking a lot about bread, not bombs, right? If you spend 96% of a dollar on weapons in the military, but you have people going hungry, and then you have civilians like them who have no training and can get out onto a nuclear warhead. Like, how safe are we really? And are we, right? Do we really have our priorities straight? This is actually a print that my aunt, who's now deceased, but made many years ago, which I think is really quite poignant in this moment in time, that peacemaking is hard almost as war. And so my parents spent their life doing that work. And I spent my first 23 years of life thinking I was going to do similar kinds of activist work for different issues, but sort of similarly structured. And it was in graduate school for me, so like many of you, where things really changed and shifted. Here's my mom and dad many years later with me outside of my school. I did my master's in international affairs over in Paris at Sciences Po. And all of my classes were in French. So my degree was in international affairs and my coursework was in French. And I was so desperate to take any class I could not in French that I found a class called business ethics. It was the only class I could find in English. And at the time, it felt like a foreign language, to be fair. I was like, well, maybe French would be better than business ethics. But I went and I did it. And it was about a month into class that a light bulb went off for me, that companies had more power, more access, more flexibility, more direct individual consumer reach than most governments and nonprofits could ever hope to have. And that if I wanted to be a change maker and I wanted to create sustainable, meaningful, lasting changes in the world, that I had to understand the role of companies. So I made a deal with myself that upon graduation, I would horrify my parents and shock everybody else that knew me, and I would take a job in the private sector. And I thought that I would stay there for 2, maybe 3 years and kind of learn a little bit about what I didn't know, and then get back out and be on the outside of these systems and work from the outside. Despite what my really good skincare regime might tell you, I am not 26, so it has been way more than 2 or 3 years. And I have spent my career, the last 15 years, working in and with companies. So I worked first in big business, then in private equity, and now most recently in venture capital. My roles, my titles have shifted as the landscape have shifted, right? From being called CSR when I was working at Coca-Cola and talking about eco-efficiency and climate risk and labor relations and human rights, to ESG when I was working in private equity and thinking about operational excellence and efficiency, risk mitigation and value creation, to most recently, currently, responsible investment. So in my 15 years, which is not really that long, this space that I've stayed in has evolved alongside my career. And all of these roles mix money and meaning, right? They sit at the intersection of profit and purpose. And I found that I was actually quite good at translating between the two sides, translating between the inner workings of a company and the outside externalities of the world. And so I became part of teams that pioneered new ways of doing business, not just in organizations, but in entire industries. And these are places that I think most people would have, and perhaps still would in some spaces, describe as traditional, cutthroat capitalists, right? And that's when they were being nice. These are places that were seen as unchangeable and unmovable. And yet over time, our work has removed tens of millions of metric tons of carbon. We have put in place policies on human rights and labor in fields and mines and manufacturing facilities around the world. We have helped set and meet targets around diversity, equity, inclusion, not just in boards of directors and executive teams, but across organizations. And we've saved billions and billions of dollars through improved efficiency, avoided controversies, and unlocked immense reputational benefits. So all that sounds really great, right? It's like, wow, damn, okay. But it's not nearly enough, not by a mile. We have luckily gotten very, very good in the private sector at changing light bulbs and writing handbooks. But the world needs us to move beyond changing light bulbs and writing handbooks, right? In fact, 76% of Fortune 100 companies have set climate goals, and 100% of Fortune 100 companies have set diversity, equity, inclusion targets, right? So this is stuff that, again, and honestly, even 2010, when I was doing this work, that would have been unimaginable. That more than 3/4 of the Fortune 100 has a 2030 climate target, and 100% of them have a stated public commitment and action plan around DE&I. So on the one hand, like, I may joke about light bulbs and handbooks. On the other hand, these are realities that, are really quite extraordinary and would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. Now, again, our work has to go far beyond these commitments. We have the opportunity, some may say the obligation, to reimagine it all, right? To reimagine the role of business in society. How does business function in society? How does society function with business? And that's when I talked a little bit earlier about being in this transition moment. We don't have the answers, we're not there yet, but if you look really kind of zoom out, you can very clearly see that we are in this moment of transition and tension. And when we think about, this obligation or opportunity to completely reimagine, not just the process, so much of ESG is about the process of how you run a business, right? I think we have the opportunity to reimagine whom and what and where and how, like, we do business, not just how, but all the other parts of it. And we need to work together to determine the series of things that underpin a new economy, right? So the series of things that allow us to operate within planetary boundaries, the tactics and programs, the policies and plans that allow us to trade equality for real and true equity, right? We need a system that penalizes and incentivizes actors for their decisions and their behaviors, or their lack of decision and lack of behaviors. Now, entire organizations, including probably some of the institutes right here at UVM, entire organizations, academic departments, careers are spent on understanding the economy, anticipating, manipulating the economy, right? In the last few years, there have been hundreds of books and articles and podcasts that talk about what comes next. How do we save ourselves, right? These are just a few of those. And there are so many really, really interesting ideas. There's also a lot of noise. It's a really, really noisy space. And so it becomes hard for people to make any sense of it, including super smart people like all of you, right? I know I already said I don't have all of the answers. The thing that I do know for sure, having been where I've been and worked where I worked, is that we no longer have the luxury of time to seek solutions that are 100% better, but 0% likely. We also don't have the luxury of control to sit complacently by promoting things that are 0% better, but 100% likely, right? We have to find some sort of balance between urgency and vision. We have to find a space between complacency and chaos. And in my experience, the answer almost always lies in the middle of extremes, right? So the land of possibilities between these two polar opposite things is where I have always found in my work and in my life to be real, meaningful, ripe opportunity for change. Now, I'll go a little bit off my kind of plan script and just go back to something I said at the beginning, where I said I sit on the edge of the inside of companies or systems, right? That comes from a theologian and philosopher named Richard Rohr, who wrote about this many years ago, about the importance of being to create change and to be sort of prophetic or agitating. You have to first love something and understand it. So you have to love America before you try to change America. You have to love capitalism to meaningfully change it. So you don't want to get stuck to the inside of the inside where you no longer can see the flaws or the faults, right? But working on the outside and not understanding systems also creates liabilities and barriers to doing really meaningful, good, long-lasting work. So I'm not going to sit here, I give you that additional context because I'm not going to sit here and just tell you that, oh, capitalism is the best thing since sliced bread. It's the only way forward, right? But I'm also going to go into a little bit of why I think we need to understand and respect parts of that system if we really want to move forward in a way that that helps us all. So capitalism is at the center of many of today's greatest challenges, right? It also has lifted countless people out of profound poverty. It has expanded life expectancies. It has enabled innovation outside of anything that would have been imaginable. It's brought about industrial and technological revolutions, right? It's raised standards of living. So capitalism has done some really good and important things. But it also is deeply flawed and it's not working right now, certainly not working for the majority of people in this world. And so I think we have to ask the question, if we were starting from scratch, but we could know everything that we know right now, would we go back and do we choose capitalism again, right? Or if we know everything that we know now, do we double down and say that this is the way forward? I don't know the answer to those things, but I do know that we aren't starting from scratch. And I do know that pinballing between these extremes, right, of 0% better, 100% likely, or 100% better, 0% likely, has not been serving us. As an example, it would be really easy to introduce self-driving cars if there weren't already cars with human drivers on the road. Self-driving cars could create a traffic utopia, right? Decreased fatalities, increased productivity. You have access opening up for people with disabilities, right? You would have no more road rage, no more drunk driving, right? It would be amazing. But the problem is there are cars on the road. And so this innovation, this new system of driving has to work with and learn from the existing reality, at least for a while. So where do we go now? I already said I know that capitalism isn't perfect and that it has plenty of design flaws and shortcomings. But I also believe it is one of the most important tools that we have, at least in my lifetime, to save us. Now, that statement assumes that we can leverage it and harness it and reimagine it. I have had the great privilege of learning from some of the best activists and some of the best capitalists in the world, right? I have spent my career in the engine room of the economy as we know it, and I have spent my life on the front lines of social change as we've needed it. And what those experiences have taught me and how they inform the way I see the world is that I think if we go through these 5 next things quickly, we can in fact build a new economy, an evolved economy, an enhanced economy, a reimagined economy. And the first thing that we need to do to build that economy is we need to expand the inputs. So I very much believe that the most important, sustainable, impactful change happens where power meets perspective, right? And a large part of my role, as I mentioned earlier, is building bridges between those two things. So often people who understand problems lack the authority to actually do something about the problems. And people who have the power lack the perspective to create change that actually helps. They are not proximate to the problems. They don't understand the real drivers and root causes. So we need more bridge builders. We need more translators. We need more, as my friends at Duke have talked about a lot, more multilingual leaders. We need people that are able to move between and to connect, not divide. Not so long ago, it was traditional expected actors that looked a little bit like this, holding 99% of influence in companies, right? Exhibit A. Now, instead of just traditional actors, there are untraditional folks like me and many others who are taking up space in traditional systems. Companies have done a great job of creating roles like mine that are responsible for and accountable to this kind of work inside of their 4 walls. And that is a huge, huge, huge step in the right direction. To have thousands of people tasked with the sustainability and social initiatives of companies, governments, universities. But we may have been brought inside, right? But it's our job to keep expanding the inputs, keep opening the doors further. So any institution where you hold power, and that could be institutions like UVM, it could also be in your communities and your families and your friend circles, places where you have outsized influence and impact. How do you think about bringing in untraditional actors from untraditional places and spaces and systems, right? Because when we expand, this is where my font got very funky, because when we expand the inputs from all, we achieve much, much better to best outcomes for all. So in addition to creating this reality that embraces and includes people from across the spectrum of lived and learned and earned experience, the second thing that I think we have to do, not just value diverse inputs from humans, but we have to better value better value natural capital. So some experts have tried to put a value on nature as a whole. Okay, $149 trillion is what the estimate is, more than twice global GDP. Other people would say that nature is priceless, right? So one can agree with that in theory, but therein lies the problem. If we don't value soil and air and water and oceans and forests appropriately, then it creates an economic system that understands that there aren't the same level of trade-offs that there actually are, right? It creates a system that doesn't understand how to manage their waste or their inputs or their outputs, right? And so we need to have a reality where soil and air and oceans and forests are valued so that we can create an economy that innovates more and wastes less, right? An economy that weathers volatility better. It also creates an environmental system, not just an economy, but an environmental system that has a chance of keeping up, right? Nature may be free, but natural resources are not. And so we have to stop treating them as though they are. It's a huge, huge problem. I remember when I joined the team at Coca-Cola, part of the reason that they were building out this function was because they had no water to make product, right? They were in droughts in multiple places around the world. And despite what you might think, Coca-Cola is actually a hyper-local product. It's made within 100 miles of where it's consumed in 95+% of the world, at least it was back then. But water flowed like wine in the 80s and 90s, right? Like you didn't pay for it. You didn't worry about it. And so you could have systems where it took 5 liters of water to make 1 liter of product and not have to think twice about that. But when you're in this moment of drought and you don't have the license to operate, you don't have the ability to make your core product, it's a huge, huge problem. And so this may be an unpopular opinion for some folks in boardrooms to hear, but I think it's also going to be the opinion that we have to value natural resources in a more meaningful way. But I also think it's going to be very unpopular when those folks aren't able to make the products or deliver the services that are core to their operating. We've heard a lot, and I'm happy to talk about it if it's of interest. We've heard a lot in the last month or two about ESG and it being part of a woke agenda or the politicization of ESG, right? For me, sustainability and ESG are not about morality, they are about viability, right? Because what is Coke without water? What is Nike without rubber? What happens when Apple doesn't have cobalt or lithium, right? What happens when companies can't find or use the resources that they need? Now, some companies are already making significant investments in future-proofing their operations, even without resource pricing or heavy regulation. On the left here, and look at these, I mean, these are big brands, these aren't small players, right? So on the left here, you have companies that have made commitments to regenerative practices, companies like Unilever and General Mills that are building this into their systems. On the right, you have companies that are making commitments to circularity, including places like BlackRock that has a multi-billion-dollar circular economy fund that has been, I don't know what it is right now, but a few months ago when I looked, it's outperforming the market significantly, right? There's money to be made, resources to be saved, value to be had by thinking about these things. And so these companies and others that aren't on this list are incredibly they're seeing the future and they're acting now. But there are whole swaths of companies that are not doing that, right? There are whole swaths of companies that do need signals and do need guideposts in order to push themselves further, faster. And so whether taxes or credits, grants, loans, standards, mandates, we have to find simple, consistent, clear ways to value nature in meaningful terms. The third thing to build a new economy for a sustainable future is that we have to increase investment and innovation. And this is across the entire system, right? Not just in the private sector, but it's including in education, philanthropy, government, and yes, business, right? We need investment in education because we have to build a new generation, a next generation of talent that pursues climate science alongside computer science, right? We need education also to evolve right now. We need to make investments today to build a workforce that is upskilled and reskilled and ready for clean quality jobs now because they exist, because they have to exist. And we need folks that are 40 and 50 and 60 years old who are working to transition into those spaces. We also need investments from philanthropy. And we need those because we have to ensure that the most vulnerable parts of our society are not forgotten. We have to use grant capital and impact dollars to advance technologies and innovations that may never be adopted by traditional markets, but that are valuable and essential. We need investment from government, not just for adaptation and resiliency, but for programs and centers and initiatives that support invention, that allow for curiosity, that de-risk the pursuit of audacious ideas. Because for as often as we might joke that the government is a dinosaur or broken or dysfunctional, the government built the backbone of the internet. The government put a person on the moon, right? This is another legacy opportunity and perhaps the biggest one of all. And lastly, we need investment from the private sector. We need startups to take ideas from labs and make them realities. We need corporations to take innovation and scale them. And we need disruption and dispersion. We need these things to happen with a speed and an intensity that the private sector is uniquely good at, right? So there is no doubt that climate change is going to cost us. It already has trillions of dollars, not to mention the suffering of human beings and countless other creatures. But the green revolution is also a chance for creation unlike anything we have ever seen. As this tweet would imply, there is certainly money to be made. But I think there's also an opportunity for more than just massive financial profit. I think there's an opportunity to generate more than that. I think that we can also create social profit and natural profit and cultural profit. I think we can create a system where more than one thing wins, right? And this is true, especially if we do this next and close to final thing, which is prioritize equity. So if you want to build a new economy that is sustainable and shared, we have to prioritize equity, because a sustainable world is a just world, is an inclusive and equitable world. Full stop. When we talk about the economic and environmental challenges ahead, we can't not talk about gender and race and class and other dimensions of diversity, because somehow the people that have the least to lose somehow keep losing the most. And it doesn't have to be that way. There are a multitude of ways that we can shift structures and evolve systems to reimagine what is possible, right? There are many ways. Today's economic pie, many people share the orange part and a few people share that blue part. There are a lot of ways that we can shift that we can change that. It might be embedding employee stock ownership plans into manufacturing and industrial companies. It might be achieved as more companies seek B Corp certifications or pursue cooperative models. Maybe it's founding businesses with a commitment to profit sharing, not just with employees, but also with communities, right? Perhaps it's funding startups with diverse founders or ones that serve historically excluded markets. And again, this version of the economic pie is not just the right thing to do, because I never do things just because they're the right thing to do. Do them because they're the smart thing to do. That's how I've been successful in the last 15 years of my career. You don't just do something because it's right. You do something because it's smart. In business, in my personal life, sometimes I'm doing things that are right. But you do things because they're smart. This is the smart thing to do. Racism has cost this country $150 trillion since 1990. This country alone. And that's not just money for Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. That is money, that is cost to all of us, right? Oftentimes we think about, the bias and the limits as just hurting the communities at which they're directed. They hurt us all. This is an economic pie that we have not realized as this country because of our choices or lack thereof around race. And it's the same for gender. $12 trillion a year right now is lost because we don't have policies and practices in place that allow for women and non-male individuals to share in a fully realized economic seat at the table. Our biases create limits, and not just for the people that they're intended to hurt, right? They create them for us all. And whether you call them limits or roadblocks or glass ceilings, whatever, they don't allow us to reach our full potential financially or otherwise. Healthy, thriving economies are built on healthy, thriving communities and vice versa. We need both of those things. And to do all of this, perhaps the hardest part, the most important part, is that we believe it's possible. How many of you, I actually want a show of hands, how many of you in the last 5 years have felt a sense of dread, doom, anxiety about the state of the world, the state of the climate? Yeah, for those of you on Zoom, 100%. Right? Of course, because this is what we're seeing. This is what we're hearing. We live in a world that feels really dark and dangerous. And so it's understandable to feel hopeless and overwhelmed by the scale of the problems that are in front of us. Moreover, we're told that fixing these things is going to be terrible and painful. And that even if we do everything possible, it still might not matter. We still might not be able to achieve, quote, better, right? We still might be in crisis. So if we continue to sell people a version of the world that is quite frankly terrifying, we continue to have people that either don't know how to act or don't want to act, right? It's not working. We need something different. Good, real, sustainable change rarely comes from a place of fear or scarcity or punishment. If you have a child, you know that. You need to engage and inspire and connect people, right? So when we're afraid or overwhelmed, we do one of three things, right? We either run away, we react without a plan, or we freeze and do nothing, right? And in a moment like the one we are facing, if we can be informed and we can be brave, we have to get in the arena. We have to show up. We have to respond, not react. We have to be creative and strategic. And most importantly, we have to keep going, right? We can't stop. When I go in and talk to CEOs about all the terrible things that could happen if they don't act, they listen to me. But when I tell them about the amazing things, the transformational things, the legacy things that could happen if they do act, that's when they really hear me. So what if we don't just show people downside risk, but a world of opportunity? What if we're honest? We have to be honest. We have to say, yes, transition is hard. This is really, really hard. And I was going to say but I caught myself. And a sustainable future is one worth fighting for, right? What if we spent more time telling folks that the shifts and changes that they are making could improve their lives and livelihoods, and perhaps more importantly, ensure life for generations to come, right? Because what if all of that was possible? I choose to believe that it is more than possible. And each one of you, every time I'm on this campus, every time I'm in this building, validate that. I am so incredibly excited and engaged and inspired by the work and the vision and the commitment coming out of the students in just this building, right? There's unbelievable, as I said in the beginning, there's unbelievable reasons to be optimistic and to be hopeful. But to do this, to create this new economy, we need people to build bridges, right? We need people to be environmental bankers, to value natural resources. We need people to be 21st century investors and think differently about how and where money is being put and what the outcomes and impact of those investments look like. We need people who are inclusion champions, not just the Black and brown people, not just the women, not just the LGBTQIA folks, but the non-traditional folks. We need allies. We need people to champion this work across systems. And lastly, we need hope architects, right? We need people like all of you that are gonna believe it's possible and that are gonna share that reality. The Gund and each of you have such huge roles to play, not just right here, right now, but across your careers and your lives. And by working urgently and convening stakeholders and developing frameworks and funding and completing research, you guys are going to be able to help spotlight the tools and the tactics that get us from this vision that I presented you with to the reality that I think is possible. I'll just close in saying that, not everyone can be an Anne or Bill Hartman or a Greta Thunberg, right? Not everyone's going to be Eric Schmidt or Oprah, and that's okay. It's more than okay. because we need you just as you are. We need each other, right? We need everybody here and around the world to do just a little bit more with who they are, where they are, with what they have, right? We need you to help propel this movement forward. And I think that if we do that, if we believe in the power of partnerships, if we believe in policies and investments and equity, then we're going to move mountains of money. Let's go. Thank you.